At 2:47 a.m., off the coast of Sevastopol, Ukrainian drones struck Russia's strongest defenses, exposing a deadly blind spot. Multi-million-dollar radars failed as the drones advanced.
At 2:47 local time, off the coast of Sevastopol, a Russian patrol boat spotted the impossible on radar. A cluster of Ukrainian drones, small, low, fast, was hurtling toward Crimea's most heavily defended airspace. What happened next would expose a deadly blind spot in Russia's entire air defense network. On the control panel, the radar signal flickered and then glowed, completely obscuring the screen. 5 anti-aircraft missiles were launched in succession in the darkness. 30 million rubles of guided weapons were launched in panic, but they missed their targets. This was not the type of target that Russian crews had been trained to deal with. When the smoke cleared, the operators saw something unbelievable. The FPVs were still flying straight, intact, and not swaying at all. Now, deep in Crimean airspace, the swarm of drones had only one mission to destroy the Russian defense network around Sapun Mountain, the high point that protects Sevastopol. Before crashing in, 2 Ukrainian UJ-26 Beavers flew high above the northeastern line of Sevastopol, acting as decoys to force the Su-30's radar to switch on high-power mode, the prelude to the main attack. But before they could reach their target, they had to survive the unthinkable. On the beach below, a Panzer S-1 system spun its radar dish frantically. This wasn't some leftover Soviet junk, it was Russia's most advanced point defense system, designed to destroy cruise missiles and protect critical targets. Yet, in just a few minutes, it had burned through 30 million rubles of missile ammunition without even shooting down a drone that cost less than an iPhone. As the FPV swarm continued to advance, Sapun Mountain appeared on the thermal image, its giant radar domes glowing like golf balls at night. Panzer opened fire again, this time switching to its 30mm cannon. The bullet trails painted bright patterns in the pitch-black sky, beautiful but completely useless. The bullets missed their targets. The Russian operators were baffled, wondering why their systems were failing. The Ukrainian drones were flying perpendicular to the radar beam at an altitude of just 50 meters, creating a phenomenon called a Doppler trough. Radar doesn't just see objects, it measures the speed at which objects are moving toward or away from the antenna. That speed is called radial velocity. When a target moves across the beam instead of toward or away from it, its radial velocity is close to 0. To the radar computer, an object with a velocity of 0 looks like the ground is still, so the system automatically rejects it, treating it as background noise. Worse, the reflections from the ocean surface create ghosts underneath each drone. The tracking computer tries to average out the real signal and the reflection, causing the missile to hit the gap between the two. Those proximity fuses need a target with a reflection area of about half a square meter, about the size of a car door. These FPVs only reflect 100% of that number, too small for the system to recognize that they actually exist. The missiles didn't really recognize the target. For them, the swarm of drones was just a small, meaningless noise point in the middle of the sea. While the Panzer S-1 operator was trying to understand why his system had turned into a useless, expensive piece of iron, new signals appeared on the thermal imager. Other FPVs were converging from all directions, looking like a swarm of metal bees tightening their siege. Panzer detected them at a distance of 2 kilometers, but its missiles needed at least 1.5 kilometers to detonate, while the approach speed was only 40 meters per second. On the deck of the USV Magura Vive-5, the NOTA electronic warfare module began emitting noise in the UHF band, confusing the receiver filter of the Podlet K-1 radar on Sapun Mountain and making it even more difficult for the system to accurately classify the already weak drone signals. That's 12 seconds from the time the radar sees the target until it passes overhead, 12 seconds to hit something the system isn't designed to see. Russian radio frequencies immediately explode, commands on commands, controllers asking for fighter support. Operators reporting, "Multiple targets, can't engage!" In the midst of the chaos, someone shouts, "Missiles can't lock, can't track!" These weren't Tomahawks or the high-speed cruise missiles they'd practiced firing. These were low-flying toys, moving as slowly as cars on the highway, and that made them invisible. 2:50 a.m. The lead drone changed its angle, heading straight for the first radome. Inside that smooth white shell were hundreds of millions of dollars worth of radars, the kind that could track ballistic missiles flying through space, detect stealth aircraft, and provide early warning for the entire Black Sea region. Each dome cost millions of dollars to build, designed to withstand a 1,000-pound bomb dropped from 30,000 feet. But no one had ever considered the scenario of being attacked by civilian electronics flying at treetop height. In the background, the remaining drones approached their targets individually, each carrying pre-programmed coordinates. The Panzer operator could only stare at the screen, watch the bright spots disappear one by one, and report the failure. The commander's response was short and desperate. "Deploy fighters now, don't lose any more radar!" As the Panzer S-1 battery was almost helpless, the pre-dawn sky suddenly lit up. A Su-30SM hurtled through the darkness, the pride of the Russian Air Force, the F-15's counterweight. Freshly built, equipped with a thrust vectoring system and a BARS radar that was advertised as being able to detect golf balls out of orbit. But just a few minutes later, it revealed a bitter truth. They couldn't see anything right in front of them. What appeared on the pilot's screen was inexplicable. Targets flickered like fireflies there in one scan, then gone in the next. It was an absurd phenomenon for the BARS radar, the main device for locking onto targets and guiding weapons, which was designed to keep targets stable between scans. Theoretically, a radar needs 5 consecutive scans to confirm a target is real, but the Ukrainian drones consistently fell below the noise floor after only 2 or 3 scans. The noise floor is the background radio waves that all radars pick up, a layer of natural noise in the universe. When a target's reflected signal is weaker than that, the radar treats it as part of the static space, no different than ocean waves or wind. On the screen, the drone slowly fades into the background noise as if it never existed. The control computer tries to rebuild the target profile, then erases it each time the signal is lost. That cycle repeats over and over, leaving the radar with never enough data to form a track file. The pilot, stressed and frustrated, decided to break the safety procedure. He launched the first R-73. The missile left the hangar, the engine ignited and soared to Mach 2.5 in a few seconds. 20 million rubles of guidance technology rushing towards the target, programmed to pursue the maneuverable jet in all conditions. A UJ-25 Skywolf medium-altitude drone activated the fake RCS reflector, creating virtual radar echoes that caused the Su-30's BARS radar to repeatedly lock onto the wrong target, severely reducing the accuracy of the entire tracking system. The FPV's thermal camera recorded the whole thing. Against the Sevastopol sky, a red streak of fire rushed straight towards it, the probe scanning each beat, approaching, then suddenly veering off course as if remembering something more important. The reason: heat. The R-73 was designed to chase a source of intense heat, a jet engine burning at 1,000 degrees Celsius, easily locked from a distance of 30 kilometers. But the drone's electric motors only generate about 50 degrees Celsius, just warm enough to be as warm as a laptop. They're virtually invisible to the infrared detector until they're within 500 meters, by which time the missile is too fast to adjust. Before the attacker can react, the pilot fires a second R-73. This time, it flies so close that the explosion shakes the drone's camera, but still misses. Even withstanding 40 grams at Mach 2.5, the R-73's trajectory is constrained by physics. At that speed, the minimum turning radius is 600 meters, and when the target is only 2 kilometers away, every few meters the drone dodges causes the guidance algorithm to miss by dozens of meters. In that suffocating environment, physics was no longer the pilot's ally. The combat space was too narrow, the reaction time too short, and the target too small. As desperation mounted, the pilot released a third, then a fourth. 4 launches, 4 streaks of light streaked into the darkness over Sevastopol, and all 4 times the cheap FPVs survived, silently heading towards Sapun Mountain, where Russia's multi-billion-dollar radar network was about to be wiped out. The pilot had burned nearly 80 million rubles of ammunition to no avail, but he had one last option: the GSH-30 cannon. At 2:52, he opened the barrel. A pack of 30mm shells rained down at a rate of 1,500 rounds per minute. The bullets spiraled into the sky over Sevastopol, streaking white light into the night. But none of them hit their target. The reason lies in the simple math of prediction. The fire computer plots a perfect lead angle based on a linear motion model, assuming the target will continue flying straight, which the drones did not. Every 2 seconds, the FPV frames would shift left or right by about 2 to 3 meters, a small but vital fluctuation. By the time the bullet had traveled a kilometer, those few meter changes would have translated into a 10-meter error at the point of impact. The firing system was solving the problem from the previous second, while the drone was creating a new one the next. Meanwhile, 500 meters below, the FPV led the S-400 arrays, capable of tracking 100 targets simultaneously and coordinating multiple missile firings. Without the cheese board, the famous S-400s would be nothing more than blind gunners. On the forklift, the 96L6E radar NATO calls it cheeseboard, looms large and exposed. This is no ordinary radar. It is the source of targeting data for the S-400 batteries, capable of tracking 100 targets simultaneously and coordinating multiple missile firings. Without the cheeseboard, the famous S-400s would be nothing more than blind shooters. And then, at 2:54, the decisive moment. The conical warhead of a drone hits the antenna array. A jet of molten copper shoots out at 8 kilometers per second, cutting straight through the delicate circuits. The conductive material is pulled back, creating conductive paths between components that should never have been connected. Millions of dollars worth of RF modules are instantly reduced to smoking iron sophisticated equipment to ash and shorted wires. From the second FPV, a RAM-2X mini anti-radar missile is launched half a second earlier, hitting the secondary navigation module of the 96L6E radar, disabling the entire transceiver cluster before the shaped charge destroys the system. Out of missiles, the Su-30SM climbs. The pilot reports to the ground control center. No longer combat capable. Radar cannot maintain lock. Request to return to base. Fuel gauges flash to safety limits. 4 missiles, hundreds of 30mm cannon rounds, 0 targets down. As he pulled the lever, the FPV blips continued to race toward Mount Sapoon, unimpeded. But on the bar's radar screen, something unusual began to appear: new communications, originating not from the direction of Ukraine, but from off the coast of Sevastopol. The signals appeared out of nowhere, flaring and settling 10 kilometers offshore, like ghosts rising from the sea. Air traffic control on the ground confirmed the same result: a series of strange targets on the surface of the water, in a range where theory said nothing could exist. While Russia was focused on dealing with the drones flying overhead, they missed the real threat, one that was right in front of them, just a few nautical miles from the shore. There, in the midst of the Black Sea, the FPV drones were sitting on the launch rails. There was no operator nearby. The control signals came from elsewhere. They were mounted on Ursula-class drone ships, small, low-slung platforms that operated silently for 2 hours straight without any radar on Mount Sapoon noticing them. Their secret lies not in stealth technology, but in pure geometry. The Podlet K1 radar on Mount Sapoon can detect aircraft at 300 kilometers, even track ballistic missiles flying in space. On the USV Magura 5-5, the NOTA electronic warfare module was activated, pushing the jamming into the Russian VHF band and opening up another 2 to 3 seconds of signal space, enough for the FPV swarm to close in on the target without being detected by the radar. But the radar's altitude of 787 to 984 feet, 240 to 300 meters, and its minimum depression angle of -2 degrees created a natural blind spot. By simple trigonometry, the radar could not see anything lower than 43 meters within 10 kilometers of the shore. The Ursulas were only 5 meters above the water. They were not hiding. They were floating in the shadow created by physics. Those small ships were floating right in the radar blind zone, a huge space roughly the size of a small city, physically carved into the coverage area of the Russian defense system. While the command posts on Sapoon Mountain were still panicking over the loss of contact with the S-400 radar, the Ursula-class USVs sprang into action. The launchers on the deck lit up, the electric motors whirring like a swarm of metal wasps, launching dozens of FPV drones one after another. Each took off with a lightness that was almost like a glide, and surprisingly, they did this despite being dozens of kilometers from shore. The answer lay in a special intermediate system. Ukraine can't control a drone directly from Odessa to Sevastopol using just a straight radio channel. The curvature of the Earth and the distance of more than 200 kilometers means the signal gets obscured after just a few miles. So, they created a seaborne relay chain, USV relay ships, located 10 to 20 kilometers off the Crimean coast. Each one acts like a floating cell tower, tall antennas, powerful radio transmitters, or encrypted Starlink links mounted on gimbals. They are the silent link between the operator on land and the swarm of drones cutting through Sevastopol airspace. At the command center, hundreds of kilometers away, the operator in Odessa sends a command signal over an encrypted internet link to the relay ship. The ship receives the signal, relays it to nearby FPVS, and the drone's image data is transmitted back. Drone arrow ship arrow Odessa, almost instantaneously. This two-way transmission system is designed to be minimalist, but effective enough for Ukraine to operate a maritime control corridor without dozens of ships. 3 to 5 relay ships, properly positioned, are enough to cover the entire 200-plus kilometer area between Odessa and Crimea. They are close enough to ensure stable, low-latency connections, while secure long-range satellite or Starlink links keep the operator in touch. Thanks to this configuration, Ukrainian drone pilots can sit hundreds of kilometers away from the front lines, still precisely controlling every movement of the FPV deep in Russian-controlled airspace around Sevastopol, a bold tactic that is both modern and terrifying, because it turns a seemingly safe sea into a virtual runway for drone warfare. They basically do their fighting while sipping coffee, controlling everything through a device that acts like a floating Wi-Fi extender. Even if the Russians can track the signal source, attacking the individual ships directly is next to impossible. 2:57 da. As dawn approaches, more USVs quietly rise off the coast of Sevastopol, each one firing up its launchers and unleashing its own swarm of drones. Those FPVs don't fly in neat military formations, which confuses the warning system. They scatter like frightened birds, each on a seemingly random flight path, but then strangely converge on a small spot like ink blots on a petri dish. Talk about irony. Sometimes nature and chance work just right to make technology irrelevant. The reason these relay ships were able to quietly remain out of sight was because the shoreside signal processors were pre-programmed. Anything moving below 20 knots was labeled as civilian fishing boats, cargo ships not worthy of triggering a response from the air defense system. These USVs deliberately maintain speeds of approximately 15 knots or less, perfectly masquerading as part of the coastal traffic. With that filter, on the screens of the Crimean coast surveillance computers, they were invisible by choice, not because they were hidden, but because the system chose to ignore them. Just 2 minutes after the new launch, the lead FPV of the second swarm rounded its approach path, entering the base of the first dome. Outside, the walls were smooth concrete and fiberglass composite designed to withstand aerial bombing. No windows, no doors that shielded millions of dollars worth of sensors. The Ukrainians zeroed in on one overlooked detail: the emergency access panels at ground level, where maintenance crews could open doors to get inside. They were designed to withstand 500 PSY of overpressure from blasts, above an impressive number for concussion protection. But no one had designed them to handle a concentrated jet of molten copper, a small but extremely energetic plasma stream. A cone-shaped explosive core can generate peak pressures of 2 million PSY at the point of contact. In that instant, steel reinforcements would crumble like paper, and delicate electronic modules would be reduced to molten metal. Nebo Dome took the next hit. This is the crown jewel of the Russian network, the answer to stealth technology. A VHF array and meter frequency antennas touted for their ability to detect stealth targets at long ranges, even F-35s at ranges of around 500 to 550 kilometers. Losing Nebo means losing all S-400 batteries in Crimea. They can only see over the horizon without this key data source. By 2:59, the offshore ships have emptied their drones. With all links to the control deck on Mount Sapun down, it's time to deliver the final blow. 0302, the mountaintop explodes. A series of explosions centered on Nebo's exposed VHF array. The dome is breached, and key junctions are instantly destroyed. The shaped charge warheads don't just bore holes, they transform the electrical structure inside. The molten copper penetrated the cladding, creating a plasma channel where the insulation turned into superconducting paths. As the copper beam broke through, the resistance collapsed to near 0 ohms. The circuits that normally carried a few amperes suddenly shot up to thousands of amperes, streaking through the waveguides and blasting adjacent modules like lightning. 40 seconds later, Podlet K1/Pontliot K1, the radar responsible for low-level tracking, suffered multiple direct hits to its transmitters. This was the link needed for low-level detection, tracking cruise missiles over terrain, monitoring low-level targets over Crimea. Losing it meant that any target flying below 100 meters became virtually invisible to the air defense network. Years of coverage investment vanished in seconds. About 3 kilometers away, on the surface of the sea, the BK-16 landing craft appeared on the thermal imager. The crew saw the approaching signs and responded with everything they had: 14.5mm deck guns, machine guns, grabbing everything. The ship's navigation radar painted dots indicating approach, but navigation radar wasn't designed to calculate firing solutions for small, maneuverable, low-flying objects like FPVs. It just painted marks. Going from a mark to a precise fire solution was a step the system simply couldn't do in a flash. They shot into the darkness and hoped for luck. The FPVs the BK-16 faced completely ignored the defensive fire. These were not smart weapons that could be jammed or fooled with decoys. They were dumb but determined, following pre-programmed GPS points, colliding by their own mechanics and inertia. When they hit the bow of the ship, the local temperature spiked a brief streak of fire, enough to blow out sensitive components on the deck. On the mountaintop, everything rushed like a waterfall in the chain of events that had been triggered. The S-400 batteries, which strike fear into the hearts of all opponents with their hundreds of kilometers of range, are now just expensive decorations. Without the 600-kilometer NABO to provide over-the-horizon visibility, the S-400s only see within 40 to 50 kilometers of their own radar, and that's when everything works perfectly. They need the Podlet K1 to see everything below 100 meters. They need the NABO to feed back long-range data. They need the 96L6E on fire to coordinate target transfers. Without those links, the entire system becomes a collection of individual launchers that don't know where to fire. Higher up, 2 UJ-26 Beaver decoy drones are still circling, sending out fake RCS signals that make the S-400 batteries constantly try to lock onto fake targets, wasting precious reaction time. 96L6E, that burning array, was the center for coordinating the transfer of radar layers. When it was disabled, the operators could only watch. They saw the targets but could not connect them to the network. The command post on Sabun took the final fatal blow. That bunker did not just house the server, it was the brain, where all the orders, all the priorities, all the decisions about the distribution of firepower were made. Just before the FPV crashed into the bunker, a Ram-2X mini anti-radar missile was launched half a second early, penetrating the military communication antenna on the roof of the bunker, cutting off all command channels from internal communications to the link with the S-400 batteries. Every identification confirmation, every engagement order, every track file transfer, all of it flowed through the now smoking servers. The shaped charge munitions punctured the reinforced steel door, turning it into a twisted sheet metal like a crumbling work of art. The fire spread rapidly into the engine room. Computers, network racks, classified files, cables, everything burned. A series of secondary explosions revealed volatiles inside, possibly ammunition or spare fuel tanks, which caused the flames to jump even more fiercely. The electronic cooling system in the bunker was knocked out almost immediately when the Ursula's EWNOTA module fired interference into its frequency range, causing the already overloaded network to collapse completely. All command capabilities here were suddenly gone forever. There were no more control nodes, no more servers to act as network brains. The information supply chain was broken. The acquisition radar had no place to send tracks. The fire control radar had no tracks to calculate firing solutions. The launchers were not receiving the guidance data needed for the interceptor missiles. The system, which had functioned as a connected organism, was now just useless fragments. The backup signal stations west of Sevastopol were blinded when the UJ-25 Skywolf drones broadcast a series of false RCS signals, causing the early warning system to lock onto a false target and prolonging the Russian confusion for a few crucial minutes. All links at the same time were cut. Within a 100-kilometer radius, there was no reliable backup transmission. The network they had trusted to protect Sevastopol lay in a pile of ash and hot metal. At the foot of the mountain, the USV Magura V5 quietly drifted past the water's edge. The Starlink antenna on the deck still flashed green, a signal that the FPV attack network, NOTA electronic warfare, and high-altitude decoy drones had completed one of the blows that paralyzed Sevastopol's air defenses. Goodbye.